I see.
Is there any way you can move to one side, Anton, so because we can't see? That's better.
Okay, let's start.
Anton, you said start, right?
Yes.
Okay, this is about slide 1, it's about Avebury. I initially called it Perceptions, Stones, and the Human Condition. But then I thought that was a little bit too weird for publication. So it's called Perceptions, Stones, and Dowsing. Slide 2.
Slide 2 is the one with the aerial view on it?
Yes, got two photographic views on it.
Okay.
The stone circle of Avebury, which you see in plan on the left, and in perspective on the right, it's less well known than Stonehenge, and it's part of a group of old structures, including the massive conical Silbury Hill, a mile or two to the south, which I hope you'll have a look at to pass it in the bus, because it's worth seeing. It's an extraordinary object, very high. So that shows you where it is in England, and once you've taken that in, I'll move on to the next slide. It's a circle of stones, allegedly 4,000 years old, with a big ditch around it, and that's a big, big ditch, very, very deep, cut out of chalk. And presumably the bits you pull out of the ditch made that, what's it called, bank around it. Now, let's move to slide 3. Over the second millennium, locals removed many of the stones to build houses. So a lot of them have been broken up and used for construction. Some of them, the ones that were fallen and lying around, were re-erected in the 20th century by a rich enthusiast called Alexander Keeler of Keeler's Marmalade. And he also placed concrete markers where he believed or had some evidence that stones had stood. So what you have today is a few of an apparent, remaining few of an apparent circle, and bits and pieces, some very large stones and a few small ones, dotted about inside with apparent pattern. Now, part of our experiment is to uncover that pattern. It's been done by one man who has proved that dowsing works, and he's done it, and it's very, very interesting. We're going to give you maps with no indications of where his findings were, to see if you find the same things. Could we move on to slide 4? Anton, tell me the tech sound is working okay.
Yeah, it says the experiment A to see how many.
Yes, the experiment is an attempt to, firstly, establish that anomaly detection, which is called dowsing, is common and easy. I've done it, as I'll tell you later, kids have done it. It seems to be a natural thing for human beings to do, it's just nobody ever tries it. Do it with a couple of metal rods, it's incredibly easy. So we expect that a high proportion of our group, which Anton, I hope, will direct with appropriate scientific method, our group of experimenters, we expect them to be able to use this simple technique to locate anomalies in the earth or beneath the topsoil, which we presume will indicate where the holes were that the stones were, right? And we expect what you find, and we expect the patterns of the anomalies, the positions of the anomalies that you find, to be consistent with the visible circles, also to indicate several others. As the picture shows, only a few standing stones are currently visible. Now, our job is to first prove that dowsing works by having 12 scientists actually doing it to record the fact that they are scientists, mathematicians, philosophers, and etc. And therefore very serious people, and they will record where and when it happened. And hopefully they will also provide maps of their findings. Now please slide 5, if you would. We go here into the esoteric bit. I'm going to read you a little bit of my experience of the weird and wonderful, because that might be quite interesting. before we get on to the science per se, I'm going to pass on to some curious perceptions of non-visual and other alternative perceptions of people and landscape. First, an anecdotal evidence, the types of experience reported. Carlos Castaneda wrote in the 70s some very popular books reporting subjective visions induced by inhalation or ingestion of vegetable products of the desert or by certain meditative practices. He described these experiences as a separate reality. That's the title of one of his books, A Separate Reality. His teacher, who was an indigenous Mexican sorcerer, argued that this separate reality was the real world. Okay, as anecdotal report, if Carlos Castaneda's reports are true, if they are, not just poetry and imagination, they hold potential indications of what might occur in other cases in which humans are able to perceive certain aspects of reality that they don't in normal daily life. Castaneda reports his teacher later telling him, and this is my paraphrase, "I had to use drugs, which is something you were familiar with, to jerk you into perceiving this alternative reality, because you were a thick-headed American drug generation sociology graduate student, addicted to your idiotically literalistic culture, so I had to use drugs to surprise you enough to see it." But in fact, these states of mind can just as easily be induced by meditation or other forms of management of one's own perception. Well, that's what the Indian said to him. He was basically trying to surprise Castaneda so much that he was able to take on some other perceptions. So it's worth bearing in mind that idea, and I invite you guys to use a method of perception which appears to work and which many people have not experienced. I've got some very small-scale experiences of something similar, and it's actually related to Avebury, so I can tell you the story because it leads into another. In the 1970s, I was smoking a little marijuana, only once on one occasion, and for the first time in many years, mainly to please someone who was a frequent user, and I found my hands operating on their own, having a will of their own, which mainly succeeded in relieving stress in my joints. I pointed my hand at my knee, and my knee felt warm, and that sort of thing. And then I directed my hands to my companion's head, which was about 2 meters away, and I perceived, as it were through my hands, certain impressions of light flowing from the crown of her head when she laughed. Well, it was an experience, it's anecdotal, it's subjective, but it certainly was a real perception. So that was in line with Carlos Castaneda's luminous egg, which he says, he and his sorcerer say they perceive around every human being when in the appropriate state. And I perceived the bright yellow gold color of this flow, unbelievably, through my solar plexus. Well, you can say that's a stoned experience, but it was a one-off. I don't usually get stoned, I got stoned on morning, and it unloaded, it unfolded an area of perception that I hadn't known about. And in fact, I found that after it, I had a new skill with my hands. I could sense the state of health of another person's body, and even communicate at a distance using an extended hand. On several occasions, I called waiters or made someone turn around suddenly in the crowd. It didn't last forever, this experience, but it happened occasionally. It connects with Avery as follows. After realizing these strange experiences were possible, I perceived that Avery gave me a defined feeling of great reassurance, apparently affecting my whole body or nervous system. The feeling was so attractive and induced me to list Avebury among my favorite places in the world when people ask me, Anton, is my voice coming over okay?
It's perfect.
Okay. Once while I was at Avery, and I decided to experiment with this, as it were, power of my hands. You won't believe this, but it really happened. I directed my hands at the visible upper part of a man walking down the central recessed road that runs through it. It's below that level of ground. He turned left and stumbled when I pointed my hands at him. I later saw that he was blind, he was being led by a dog, and I had apparently diverted his dog up the grass bank. The poor fellow fell over, the blind man fell over because of my... Anyway, these things apparently happen. Right, I discovered one other curiosity which is actually very interesting. The deep feeling that Avebury gave me, I no longer felt when I became in a satisfying relationship with a female. In other words, it was as if the location had provided some kind of energy that was lacking in a normal adult, and which was fully compensated for by a male-female relationship. That's actually really interesting. You've got a place that gives you a feeling, and then suddenly you have a human interaction, and the feeling is no longer given to you by the place. But I would not even mention these experiences now to you if it were not that Anton, when I talked to him about this, confessed that he has similar, as it were, energy perception feelings related to places, especially including Avebury, and on a much, much larger scale than my own, which are insignificant and appear to be completely anecdotal. So I thought, as a result of Anton's reaction, I thought my own impressions at least had the anecdotal value of the fact that they're like someone else's. So that's part of a potential accumulation of, I don't know, we call it Class C evidence, anecdotal. We're going to ask Anton to recount his experiences in a minute. But first I've got two other slightly more practical and pragmatic experiences. The first is, later on after these experiences, I would go to visit Avebury at moments exactly when the desire took me, suddenly. Once in 2014, I was sitting at my desk and I thought, okay, now's the moment. Called in on my family, who lived in the next street, and I said, anyone want to come to Avebury? And 12-year-old Theo said yes. So we went straight there. And on arrival, I went straight to my, quote, favorite, quote, point, the place where I used to get the maximum feeling of identification and assurance, which is in fact a pyramidal concrete pillar in the southeast quadrant. And there I found a man using dowsing rods. Who was he? Please move on to slide 6. He was Paul Dorr. He's a former land surveyor, turned dowsing and stone circle mapper, a retired surveyor. He showed me the two rods in his hands, which are exactly similar to those that I have provided that you will use tomorrow. He told me, almost anyone can do it. I held the two rods and I set off. They very soon crossed in my hands at a certain point. The effect is a strong one. You're walking along with your two rods in your hands, having spent about half a minute practicing so that you feel you can really hold them so they continue straight when you walk. And as you go over a certain point, the two rods move together, they cross over, and then they move apart. It appears to be a sort of decided, controlled manner they do it. It's uncanny, but it happens apparently with everybody. Why do I say that? 12-year-old Theo experimented and found the rods crossed, zip, very strongly at the certain place that he crossed. And when he's crossed, they reliably crossed at the same place as they did with me. And Mr. Dorr then told us that with this tool he had identified 3 lines of stones, close to the one we were looking at, where none are currently visible. Well, these are the things that I hope you will find. Later he sent me his complete map of the entire Avebury site, showing several oval circles and lines of these anomalies within the great outer circle. He also researched the whole of the outer circle and showed where those stones had been, or at least where there were continuing anomalies in the land surface. Those ones that are now lost. So that's him. Look on the left. He said a 12-year-old could do it. Sure enough, our 12-year-old did do it. On the right is a book you can get, which is his full, presumably contains his full map of Avebury, which we've also got in Xeroxable form, in file form. Let's go to slide 7, and I'll tell you something else about muscles. Anton will tell you that his theory, which I go into on a later slide, is that the reason this happens is because our human body has lots of nervous system and that's a lot of electrical circuits, and they feed muscles, and they are sensitive to what goes on under the earth. If something changes in the electrical field underneath them, you move those rods without realizing you're moving them. You change the inclination very slightly, and sure enough, because they're in a non-secure position, they fall with the movement. The movement's imperceptible, you don't realize they're doing it, and they come back on. So he's going to tell you about that. Anyway, my second curiosity here is the kinesiologist who I met on one of my visits to Avebury. I met a kinesiologist. I asked her what her profession involved, and she said it was dusk. She said, kinesiology detects changes in muscle tension that result from directing the subject's mind to various themes. She says, you stand with your hands by your side, near your hips, and with your full arm, and maybe able to do this you stand with your, wait a minute, see if I can do this. You stand with your hand there, I can't get up high enough, and with your full arm as it hangs down, you exert a very slight pressure outward against the kinesiologist's hand, which she or he holds, also very lightly restraining that pressure. The kinesiologist asks you a question, and when your body reacts, she feels it as an altered stress in your muscle. So that's a clear definition of how a mental state, or something that happens to a nervous system, is transmitted to your muscular system without you really realizing it. So she said to me, here's her experiment. She said, propose a question and give me a list of possible answers. So my question was, what is the nature of this unspecified relationship that I feel I have with Avery? What's going on? Why do I feel this? And what is it I'm feeling? Then I asked, what's the nature of the relationship? And we wrote down a wide list of answers, all adverbs, to the level of the absurd. Intellectual, social, moral, historical, philosophical, sexual, political, literary, many of them. So what was the nature of my relationship? We went through the list, and we got a very clear reaction from only one of the adverbs, racial. So, according to kinesiology, somewhere in my subconscious is reported the fact that, is stored the fact that my relationship with this place is racial. She perceives it by this method, and it's all new to me, right? It's a mystery to me how I, whose family apparently come from Sussex, Gloucestershire, and Scandinavia, should have a racial relationship with Avebury. But I then found an uncanny fact. In the 70s, my oldest brother bought a house 6.5 miles south of Avebury, at the middle of the circle. And soon after, my older brother, the other brother, bought a house at Wootton Bassett, 6.5 miles north of that same point. Meanwhile, I, having no money, I had no house, am someone who is obsessed, you might say, with this site, or at least I have strong and pervasive feelings of attachment to it, even living 25 years in Brazil. So you've got a map, which comes up on the next slide, which may relate to a statement that I have a racial relationship to the site, but it kind of serves to underline that this kinesiologist may have had some reality behind what she was doing. The reason I'm telling all these anecdotes is that they tend to inspire one with a suspicion that the stones or the site have some relationship with some aspect of the human condition. In my second question to the kinesiologist, she was dousing my subconscious. It's the same thing, getting a feeling in a muscle. I said, how old is this site? We went through a list of thousands of years, starting at 0 BC, and we went by the thousands and the tens of thousands, and she got a positive reaction, absolutely solid positive reaction at 26,000 years. So theoretically, information is recorded in my subconscious that I know something, that Avery is 26,000 years old. So there we go. That's the limit of my diversion into the weird and wonderful. Now we get back to the slide, if I may, slide 9. This is just a map of us three brothers and our racial connection. On the right, the site at the top is my middle brother, a red dot at the top, that's 6-point-something miles north of Avebury. And at the bottom is my eldest brother, 6-point-something miles south of Avebury. And I, the youngest brother, is the one who's obsessed with the place. Amusing, isn't it? Well, it certainly was remarkably strange to me. I'm hoping I'm on slide 9. No, I'm not yet. This is slide 9. Oh, yes. I now address Anton. Anton, you have proposed that something very similar to the kinesiology happens in dowsing. See if I have correctly enlarged on your hypothesis. A change in the chemical and perhaps, therefore, electrical or other characteristics of the ground we walk on would reasonably be reflected in this vast collection of electrical connections, which is our nervous system. It's more than reasonable, seeing how kinesiology works, that a slight change might alter some muscle tension. If we hold an L-shaped rod and make a tiny hand movement, say 1 degree of arc, the rod being unstable, it is predictable that the rod should rotate. Thus, the hypothesis is that, I've slightly lost my ideas, is that the anomaly being detected, in fact, alters our muscular tension. I was just thinking last night, as I wrote this a couple of days ago, Avebury and most of Wiltshire lies on chalk. To set a standing stone in chalk might require you make a hole in the chalk. The chalk is probably 100% permeated with water, so that a hole in the chalk means a hole in the conducting continuum. Looked at from this point of view, the phenomenon appears increasingly realistic. Okay, so that's about the phenomenon. I think slide 10, if I may now, are some questions for Anton. I'm going to ask Anton to see if he'd like to tell us a little about his things. How would you briefly describe the feelings that you personally have at Avery?
Well, I visited Avery at the beginning of July. I was at another conference, and there was a conference to Avebury. Basically, while still on the bus going there, I had something different than normally, and personally that site, similar to what Stephen has said, it's, there's an odd feeling to it, I can't say it's tension, it's just something in you, that you feel, but you can't say what it is.
I seem to remember you saying it was a very strong feeling. Have I got that right?
Yeah, it's you feel different. You just, you said it gave you a form of satisfaction that you didn't have in other occasions. If it's that to me, I wouldn't know. It's not only with Avebury. I can feel plants, or trees, that. You sort of resonate with them, it's the same sort of feeling I have there, if I stand under a tall tree, the wind's blowing, it feels as if my body is going up and down, as the branches do this, I do this, anyway.
I guess a lot of people have these sort of feelings perhaps and don't either notice them or comment on them or even stop to think about them. Do you perceive anything like, we hear a lot about ley lines, which I find extremely hard to believe in, and lines of energy in the soil, I find that very hard to believe in. Do you perceive anything like that, lines of energy or anything of that sort? Have you perceived anything like that?
No, I wouldn't say lines of energy, but you do, you do, come to areas where things suddenly change. I once visited China, actually I was there twice, to visit a Tai Chi master and talk to him after, sort of the energetic experience I had in Dubai. This is actually where it all started. I was hiking with an American in these, Dolomite. They've got these iconic little mountains. We were going up one of these mountains, and I said we're going to come to a cave soon, because I felt, something coming out of the ground, towards me, and lo and behold, a couple of steps further, there was just a little slit, and out of the slit was rushing cold air. But it was about 10 yards before that I already sensed it. Did you hear that?
My next question. Have you got any theories for the mechanism of those perceptions that you have?
Well, it's, I call it life force. I believe there is, we don't just have the electric force and the gravity force. There must be something, in my opinion, there must be something else that makes life. I once discussed this with Peter Rowland, who's not here, and he just said, well, life is emergent out of physics. If it just happens, I don't believe, and the sister-in-law, she is now Professor Emeriti at Yale University. She saw evolution and so on, and she made a statement that it is a current belief that life is basically everywhere in the universe. There is something there, so life can form anywhere.
Panspermia.
If the conditions are correct. So, because the thought is, how do you bring these chemicals together, and these things do whatever they do to come into a life form. Okay, let's carry on.
You have any final overall comment on the whole subject? I'm going to get on to the experiment now.
Well, just have an open mind, that's what I would say.
Okay, shall we go to slide 11? Which should say, yes. Took a picture of the wire. Let's do some scientific reporting here. It's curious to notice the label says that the wire is 2.5 millimeters in diameter. Well, it most certainly is not 2.5 millimeters in diameter. It's labeled as such. You will be holding it in your hand tomorrow, I think. I must have got the right one. And it doesn't look anything like this, but I just, for amusement, took a picture of the wire to show you the wire I used to make your dowsing rods. And the experiment is simply, you take the rods that I have created by cutting and bending this fence wire, whatever it is, and you experiment. You will experiment to first find out whether the rods are in your hands, and secondly, please get you to report accurately on the maps that I hope Anton will provide, the points, if any, where they move in your hands. Anton will give you blank maps, and later we will report, I hope, on how your findings compare with the complete map as perceived by Paul Dorr, which we're not showing you because we don't want to encourage you to see the answer that he produced. Now, I believe I now go to slide 12, and I just said, subjects you might like to discuss, if you would like to, you may want to speculate on the nature of the stimulus that has this effect on our nervous systems, which it does appear to have. Nobody seems very keen on ley lines or energy lines. Conditions in the land surface or its underlying rock seem to be one of the answers. One could speculate that perhaps the ancients felt things that we don't. They were not sophisticated, they didn't have Descartes, they only had prehistoric perceptions. Maybe they had different perceptions, and maybe that's why they put up these stones at places where they felt the energy, on the assumption that this would assume they had capacity for perception we don't have, or perhaps only some of us have inherited. It's worth noting, Anton reports some strong perceptions of this type. He's from the Czech Republic, and I have had quite a lot of interactions with people from Eastern Europe who are able to perceive things about other humans, and they show various levels of ability ranging into the psychic. So there may be some type of human who has, these things a bit more strongly in them. I only realized as I wrote this today that, of course, I have Scandinavian blood. So maybe that is something to me being more sensitive to this sort of thing. But you may like to discuss those subjects. I'm just going to go on to 14 before I get to an open discussion. 30, in which I say, once again, only remains to ask you to try out the mechanism for the joint scientific purposes of testing the phenomenon using a cohort of experienced scientific minds, scientists, mathematicians, philosophers, engineers, thus giving credibility to our observations, and second, adding to the world's store of information about where the anomalies are on the site. Hopefully you will be able, if you're willing, and if Anton is willing, to come up with some very accurate records of where anomalies are felt, which presumably should indicate the initial positions of standing stones, or holes made for them, or the holes made for other items which have been inserted or below the topsoil. So I hope you'll be able to join us on conducting this experiment with the same detailed attention to reporting of results that you habitually apply to any experiment. I think that's all I've got to say. In which case, I would like to leave it open to you if you feel like discussing or asking me anything I know, because I don't know much more than what I told you. Discussing this, and I think if Anton chairs any such discussion, that's better than me trying to do it here from the other end of the virtual universe. So, over to you guys. If you want to talk about what happens, I'm Anton in the chair.
Any comments? Or?
I have one comment. This is Michael, one of the Michaels. Why do you dismiss ley lines? Just a feeling, or you've not read about it, or?
My answer is, I've read the whole of Watkins, what's his name now? The old straight track, right? Read the whole of that. I've spoken to millions of excitable people on the top of Glastonbury Tor and similar places, and some of them are quite certain that they perceive where the ley lines are, and that they go from this cathedral to that cathedral, and it sounds as if they have a strong body of perception. But for me, it's extremely anecdotal, even though in some cases very exact, and therefore, like most ignorant people, I dismiss what I haven't felt personally. But who knows, if somebody can show that it really exists, I'd be delighted, because it's very interesting.
So the plural of anecdote is not evidence for you?
Anecdote is not evidence, yes,
it's a joke.
It's 5 types of evidence, starting from A and going up to F or something, from 1 to 6. And all of this stuff is completely anecdotal. On the other hand, if you had a crowd of 100 people and they all came up with exactly the same anecdotal evidence, that would be statistical evidence.
Thanks.
I'm hoping that tomorrow we'll get a crowd of 15 people coming up with the same perceptions, which will show that those perceptions are common to the cohort, or part of it. Anyway, on ley lines, I'm an ignoramus. I've read a lot. I'm not inclined to believe. And I can't do any better than that. If you can tell me more about ley lines, I'd be delighted to learn.
Okay, thank you.
No, I'm just ignorant, basically.
I'm not an expert of any kind on the Stonehenge-Avebury complex, but my understanding is that the conventional archaeological view is that the circle at Avebury is more or less coeval with, I think, phase 3, Stonehenge 3. I may be wrong about that, but on my understanding, there isn't any suggestion in the conventional view that the Avebury circle is very, very much earlier than Stonehenge. If this reported reaction that you had in conversation with this sensitive that placed it at 26,000 BC were, if there were anything in that, it would push the conventional dating of Avery backwards by almost an order of magnitude. I mean, that would be quite a striking slap in the face of the consensus archaeological opinion.
It certainly would. I have read a few things coming up recently in which people almost prove or demonstrate that certain things existed some 12,000 years ago. There's that site in Turkey, I know that Anton knows the name of it, Teki something.
Yes, I'm particularly interested in this because I was involved for about 5 years with a group of Russian scientists, actually Russian geometers, who, independent of their interest in differential geometry, were also very interested in what one might call, just for the sake of a label, non-mainstream Egyptology, and who formed the opinion from various. What was presented to me I found remarkably convincing, or certainly remarkably striking evidence that the dating of the pyramid complex at Giza and of the other great sites of Egypt was the conventional dating was completely mistaken, that they were in fact the products of a civilization that had flourished around 12 or 15,000 years earlier. Now, the evidence for that is various and complex and would take us too far afield, but it is quite striking that there is a similar body of opinion about some of the other great iconic archaeological sites in the world, that they have, that their actual dating is very significantly earlier than the conventional opinion has it.
Yes, Graham Hancock has issued a lot of films mainly showing things that tend to support those views quite strongly. One of them is an underground construction off Japan, which by some logic, which I've forgotten, he places 12,000 years ago. I suggested to Paul Dorr that some person with arcane knowledge had suggested that the place was 26,000 years old, and he said that it was unlikely that it was pre-Ice Age, presumably because the ice would have knocked the stones over, which is an interesting point.
Yes.
So,
yes.
that remains in the field of pure anecdotal speculation, but it was interesting to have experienced it.
Yes, that's interesting. Yes, actually, the point about the glaciation is very well taken. I mean, the whole of that area of northern Europe was completely covered by the ice sheet at a period less than 26,000 years ago. So that does seem to present a major problem for such an early dating. But still, one should keep an open mind.
Authority to this personal perception that is divined by a person operating kinesiology on my nervous system.
No, I'm not suggesting that.
It has no strength at all.
But I think we should still be open-minded.
It's just interesting to see the technique being used and remarkable answers it came up with.
Fascinating.
So,
Well,
are you
I just
to
want...
do some extremely exact reporting on Anton's maps tomorrow?
Well, I just want to... It's Nicola here. I just want to say thank you for having organised all these dowsing rods. Before I heard about it, I was searching in my downstairs cloaks for old wire coat hangers, thinking, oh my goodness. So I'm very impressed, and it looks like a wonderful gift bag that you've sent us. So thank you.
Well, that's very good. Thank you. It took me a certain amount of time learning how to take a round circular wire and bend it out straight systematically, and I realized how craftsmen learn their skills. It took me about 2 hours to learn how to do it, and I was quite good at getting a straight line out of a rolled up wire. But it's just, when I see something that stares you in the face and works for all the human beings I've proposed it to, or about 3, and nobody knows about it, nobody talks about it. I think, well, that's science, that's stuff you need to know. So that's why I made the effort. And here, when Anton said we're going to Avebury, I thought, wow, here's a chance to get some real experienced people whose reporting is able to be respected. I'm hoping we'll be able to write it up and make it some real data. It's very interesting.
Well, Stephen and Saul, you must thank Lou for that. If it wasn't for his reply, yes, very interesting, I don't think we would have done it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. I hope you'll really put everybody through their paces to make sure they get lots and lots of data. And then when you connect it together, I'm expecting it to be exactly consistent with all those maps, which they have not seen.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll tell them that they're not all to slope off to the pub or the tea room straight away.
No sloping off to the pub. They gotta work hard. It's a soft experiment. I think that's all I've got to say, unless you guys got something to say.
Well, I can notice some very heavy eyes here.
Yeah, we're all,
You know,
we're all tired.
we've got a early start. So, Stephen, can I say thank you? It's even later for you. I think we've got 2 hours behind us, if I'm not mistaken. So you've got about 11:15, haven't you?
It's 11:15.
Yeah. Okay. It's 9:15 here.
Anton, I look forward to hearing the results of the experiment.
Yeah.
Encourage you and us to write them up in a way that is credible.
Yeah. Okay. Fine.
Great. Good night.
Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great pleasure to be there with you. I'm sorry.
It worked very well.
Before you go, this was a very nice test run because now we know how to bring other presenters in onto the meeting.
Absolutely.
I was always hesitant to do this,
Yeah.
and through doing it this way, we're sitting in the room, far away from the computer, it works.
It works extremely well.
You're on the loudspeaker, so nicely.
There are ways, of course, that you can actually put the image on the screen as well.
Yes, I know, but we want to.
It wasn't necessary to do this.
It was just because of the slides.
And his head size instead of enormous.
Yes.
So,
You're not seeing my head, right? You can
no, we've got the
Yeah.
screen in front of you, so we're all watching a small TV in front where you are on. Okay, cheers.
God bless.
see you all soon.
That really was the most successful Skype presentation I've ever attended.